Today we're going to discuss PBIS. What is PBIS? PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Intervention and Systems. Many of us may not be familiar with the term PBIS, but most of us have probably heard of something similar called MTSS, Multi-Tiered System of Supports, RTI, Response to Intervention, or in the early child care world, we call it the pyramid model. While positive behavior and intervention supports, PBIS, differ from MTSS, RTI, and the pyramid model, there are several similarities. You have probably heard of and even implement many of the PBIS strategies into your school or your classroom. We will be discussing some of these interventions later on during the presentation. PBIS is a proactive approach to student behavior. We want to be sure that we are practicing and promoting proactive behaviors rather than reacting to a behavior. We want to focus on helping students learn to make a positive decision. PBIS is appropriate for all ages and ability levels. It can be established as a school-wide setting or a classroom-wide setting. PBIS is a research-based approach that's focused on data collection to determine outcomes and systems, and it is a three-tiered framework. The three-tiered framework is based on an example of a pyramid, the bottom tier being the preventative practices for all students. Tier 1 represents 80 to 85% of our student base. Tier 2 is a more targeted group intervention that is appropriate for some students, but not all students. It's effective for 15 to 20% of our student base. Tier 3 is the most intensive and individualized intervention for very few students. It is effective for 1 to 5% of our student base. The great thing about PBIS is that it can be modified to meet students in ages pre-K, even earlier. In my situation, I am actually implementing it into a child care program, and it can be utilized through high school, as well as many disability ranges. So why do we need PBIS? PBIS is proved to help all students be more successful. It offers an increase in student self-esteem and their self-awareness. It uses a reward system and positive consequences rather than punishment. Studies have proven that punishment does not benefit children because they react negatively in that situation. PBIS is an inclusive environment for all students. Through PBIS, we're able to build a partnership with our students, the staff, and the families as we work together. Now we'll discuss more in depth about Tier 1. What is Tier 1? Tier 1, as we stated earlier, is effective for 80 to 85% of our student population. It provides continuous support through our classrooms, through our individualized plans. We're able to help all students learn to make positive choices, to adapt their behavior in a proactive approach. We use the data that is collected to guide our decision making. The principles of Tier 1 include collecting data, organizing the environment so it is prepared for daily work, teaching skills and systems. We want to teach our skills just as we would any academic source. We're going to teach those skills. We will then implement the practices into our classrooms or our schools. And once those practices have been implemented, we will continue to monitor the progress and make updates as needed. So for our Tier 1, there are 4 elements of PBIS. Those elements include outcomes, data, practices, and systems. Outcomes are determined for the class or the school. This is what you want as your goals. Consideration should be taken into account for the context and the culture that you're working with. Context relating to the age or ability level of the students, and the culture being what is culturally appropriate. These outcomes need to be observable and easily measured. Data, quantitative indicators of fidelity and effectiveness. We will discuss data more in depth on our next slide. Practices are focused on students. They are the intervention and supports that are implemented. We want to ensure they are contextually and culturally appropriate. For example, you won't want to use the same method for a kindergarten student that you would use for a high school student. And we want to make sure that these practices use evidence-based research. And systems. Systems are focused more on our staff. We want to use systems to ensure that we stay consistent with our practices. Systems include administrative support, plans for professional development, staffing resources, staff rewards and acknowledgement, and data collection. We want to make sure, as you can see in this graph, that we use data to support all of our decision making. So let's talk a little bit more about the data collection systems. We use data to measure the fidelity and effectiveness of our research. This will be determining what we want for our practices and our systems. We need to make sure that data is consistent and that we use collection forms. On the right side, you can see an example of a data collection form that's being used for a student school environment survey. Again, we want to make sure that our data forms, if we're using surveys, are age appropriate. There are many apps that you can use for your data collection. You can choose to use one of these apps, or you can choose to make your own. Sometimes you will have a combination of both. You need to make sure that you're routinely collecting your data. And then once data is collected, we want to review regularly and continue collecting data so that changes can be made as needed. So this is looking at a tier 1 intervention. This particular intervention is talking about using breaks in the classroom. The research proves that breaks are used in classrooms for many different benefits, such as movement and a calm down time, or for redirection. Evidence research says that breaks are important and proactive strategy to help prevent misbehavior. The research also suggests that when students are given breaks, they're more likely to stay on task. Some of these breaks include brain breaks or physical activity breaks that have proved to be beneficial in the classroom setting. Breaks can be modified and are appropriate for all ages. So how can we implement breaks into our classroom? The first step is to choose the type of break that we want to implement in our room. We want to ensure that we set expectations that are clear and rules for the different types of breaks. When we set these expectations and rules, we want to make sure that they're clearly defined and that the student is able to understand them. The second step is to explain to the students what the expectations are and model to them what they should look like. Rather than simply telling them, we want to make sure that we show them. Step 3, when it is time for the break, describe what type of break will be given and give the clear expectations. As the break occurs, offer verbal and visual reminders of the expectations and practice these breaks as necessary. Step 4, as students become familiar with the expectations, you'll be able to reduce the amount of reminders that are necessary. And our next slide will show us an example of some breaks. So one thing that we can do for a physical activity break is to get moving. This includes dancing, standing up. It can be finger plays. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see an example of breaks for music and movement, dancing to the color song. This is the way I move, and shake our sillies out. On the right-hand side is an example of how you can offer a break in a classroom. So for in this instance, if you have a student who you notice is getting antsy in their chair or needs a break away from the classroom, you can have this note ready. You can just write in a name and then ask the student to deliver a note to another classroom. This gives them an opportunity to get out of their seat, to move around, and just offers that break for them that they may be needing. Before you implement this, you want to make sure that you have already made a plan with that co-teacher so that they know what to expect and that you will not be interrupting their classroom instruction. Another example of a class or a tier 1 intervention is to set clear expectations. The research suggests that expectations should be clearly stated and able for students to understand. Evidence-based research also proves that when clear expectations are set, there's a decrease in inappropriate behavior. Oftentimes, we find that students act out because they do not know what the expectations are and they're going to test those boundaries. Research proves that it is necessary to remain consistent with your expectations. Research also suggests that classroom behavior affects all areas, including relationships, academics, emotional skills, and safety. Research proves that a proactive strategy should be in place before inappropriate behaviors begin to occur, and expectations should be clearly stated. To establish the expectations in the classroom, the first step is to choose what expectations for your classroom or school. Make sure they align with your PBIS plan for your classroom or your school, and you may want to include your students in developing the expectations. Ask them what their role should be. Ask them what expectations they want to meet. Step 2, clearly explain to the students what the expectations are and model what they should look like. Offer verbal and visual reminders of the expectations and practice as necessary. Step 4, as students become familiar with the expectations, you may reduce the amount of reminders that are necessary. Some examples of expectations that we can have in our classroom or in our school. On the left-hand side is the behavior metrics. You can see that this behavior metrics uses the words friends, listen, and care. When you do a behavior matrix, you want to make sure that each area of the school and classroom are included and that you set the expectations for what each of the rules are. So as you can see, there are expectations of arrival, classrooms, centers, and so on. On the right-hand side are the classroom rules. Your classroom rules should be short, usually 3 to 5 rules that are clearly defined and age appropriate for children to understand. Now we'll look at our next tier level, tier 2. Our tier 2 interventions use data to determine if we need them. So if we see a student who is not responding to tier 1, who we think needs a little bit of extra care, we're going to look back to our data to determine that. Some of these examples of data can include discipline referrals, screenings, teacher recommendations or nominations, and assessments. Tier 2 is effective for 15 to 20% of the students. We'll utilize this data to determine when a tier 2 intervention is needed. Tier 2 is targeted small group interventions. Rather than being in a full class, these will be smaller groups of students with approximately 3 to 4 students in each group. Tier 2 often uses mentors, which can include teachers or students, and we will look at an example of mentoring students later on. Tier 2 also utilizes social skills groups. Tier 2 should be implemented 3 to 5 times per week. It will depend on the intervention, how many times per week you meet, as well as the student. Each time that you meet, you should meet approximately 20 to 40 minutes. And it's important to remember that a Tier 2 intervention is not intended for a long time approach. We want to make sure that we're creating an exit plan. Typically, a Tier 2 intervention lasts between 10 and 12 weeks. And if possible or needed, you may have to do an additional round of Tier 2 interventions for a student. An example of a Tier 2 intervention is a check-in and check-out system. The check-in, check-out is an effective Tier 2 strategy that allows students to meet with teachers and mentors daily. Evidence-based research suggests that check-in, check-out is successful for students in grades pre-K through 12th grade. Research proves that students who have utilized check-in, check-out have increased positive behavior and academic success. Check-in, check-out is an economical intervention for school systems due to the low cost and limited time requirement for teachers. Check-in, check-out is an extremely effective method for students who have a desire for adult attention. Check-in, check-out is not designed as a long-time intervention, again, as it's a Tier 2 intervention, and we want to make sure that an exit plan is created. Research also proves that check-in, check-out is most effective with consistency and positive praise. In the classroom, if we want to implement check-in, check-out, the first step is to meet with the student and determine which behavior will be monitored. We want to set our expectations, our goals, and rewards, and then we will create a check-in, check-out form together with the student. The student will meet with the mentor each morning. Throughout the day, they will check in and out with each teacher. If you're in a one-teacher classroom for our elementary students, you may want to check in or out after each subject. At the end of the day, the student will check out with the mentor and discuss the day. The student then will check in at home. The parent will sign those papers, and the student will bring it the next morning. Step 3, mentors will continue to review expectations daily with students and present awards as they are reached. Step 4, keep records of the data and observations. Create an exit plan for the intervention. You can see on the screen 2 different types of check-in and check-out forms. The one on the left would be more appropriate for a younger student, elementary or preschool. You'll write the activity. You can circle whether they were positive or negative and add your notes. You want to make sure that the student, yourself, and the parent signs it. Make sure that you're setting your expectations and your rewards. It's important that the students understand that when they display the positive behavior, the desired behavior, that there will be a reward for their action. It's very important to remain consistent with these expectations, as well as consistently give the rewards. On the right-hand side, you can see an example of another check-in and check-out sheet. This would be more appropriate for our older elementary or middle school students. It can also be adapted to work into junior high or high school. This particular check-in, check-out utilizes the number system. So you circle which number was appropriate for the day, as well as the total points. The next Tier 2 strategy that we will look at is peer tutoring. Research suggests that peer tutoring is a strategy that pairs two students together. Students can be paired in one of three ways. A student of high academic success can be paired with a student of lower academic success. Two students of equal academic skills can take turns role-playing as the student and the teacher. Or an older student who is able to come into the classroom can serve as the tutor for a younger student. Evidence-based research suggests that peer tutoring increases academic success, specifically in reading and math. Research proves that students who have a peer tutor have increased their social and emotional skills, including self-confidence and a higher morale. Peer tutoring is a cost-effective intervention for schools to implement, as there is no additional cost and little teacher time required. If you would like to implement peer tutoring into your classroom, the first step is to observe students and determine which students would benefit from tutoring together. Set the goals that you want to meet. Step 2, meet with the students who will serve as tutors and provide examples of how they will serve as a tutor, making sure to set the expectations. During class, divide into peer tutoring pairs. Actively supervise and observe students to ensure that they're staying on task. And step 4, keep records of data and observations. Present awards as they are achieved and create an exit plan for the intervention. These are some examples of a peer tutoring log. Both of these examples talk about the activities that were practiced. It includes the amount of time that practice occurred, and this helps to hold students accountable for making sure that they're covering the information needed. The next and last tier is Tier 3. Tier 3 is very similar to Tier 2, however, it is more targeted and focused. Tier 3 is effective for 5 to 8% of our student population. It is a targeted and individualized intervention. It has increased intensity. It has more frequent progress monitoring, and it should be done monitoring should be done at least once every 1 to 2 weeks. A Tier 3 intervention is more likely to be used daily and more frequently, both in the classroom and spending more time for intervention. It is, however, not intended for a long-term use, so an exit plan should be created. Typically, a Tier 3 intervention lasts between 8 and 16 weeks. An example of a Tier 3 intervention plan is a behavior contract. The research suggests that behavior contracts are a written agreement created between the teacher and student that clearly lays out the expectations and rewards. It's an evidence-based research suggesting that when behavior contracts are implemented, inappropriate behavior is reduced. Behavior contracts are believed to increase the academic success of students. Behavior contracts are proven to help promote confidence in students. Contracts are recommended for individualized use. The contracts provide accountability for students. They can be modified as an effective intervention method for ages pre-K through 12th grade. And behavior contracts are an economical option for schools because of the relatively low cost of materials and the limited additional time required for staff. To implement a behavior contract in the classroom, the first step is to meet with the student and determine what behaviors will be monitored. Together, you will work to create a behavior contract that includes the expectations, the goals, and the rewards to be achieved. The second step is for the student, the teacher, and the parent to sign and agree to the terms of the behavior contract. The third step, the teacher will provide feedback and rewards as the student achieves them, continuing to meet daily to review the contract and expectations. Step 4, keep records of data and present the student with rewards as they are reached. Make an exit plan for the student. On the screen, you can see an example of a behavior contract. This behavior contract is set up to be more for an elementary student. Together, you will meet with the student, create the expectations. As you can see on this behavior contract, a sticker is given for the thumbs up chart each time one of the expectations is met. 3 stickers can be earned each day. Then the next section of the contract states how you'll receive a reward. After 12 stickers have been collected, the student can choose one of the following rewards. There's also an additional bonus reward for a perfect week. And the last part of the contract, there's a signature for the student, there's a signature for this teacher, and there's a signature for the parent. Another effective Tier 3 intervention is a visual schedule. Visual schedules allow students to stay on task and follow where they are throughout the day. A visual schedule can be broad to cover a Tier 1 intervention, or in this case, an individualized for a specific student. Research suggests that visual schedules offer smoother transitions between activities with less time spent during the transitioning. Evidence-based research proves that students become more accountable and there is less need for teacher-directed instructions. Visual schedules can be created to help students stay organized and address their specific needs. Visual schedules have a low cost to the school, and research suggests that students remain more attentive on academics and instructions. To create a visual schedule, the first step is to create an individualized visual schedule for the students based on the activities for each day. Step 2, you'll meet with the students and go over the visual schedule, discuss the expectations and rewards for staying on task. Determine an easily visible schedule location for the student to refer back to. Step 4, use modeling and visual cues as needed to remind the student to stay on task and utilize the visual schedule. Step 5, keep records of data and meet with the student to observe progress and present the rewards. These are examples of visual schedules that are again directed more towards our younger elementary students. You can use visual schedules in your classroom as well as for specific students. And this is also effective if you have a student who you need to break down activities for even farther. So now we'll take a look at some of the PBIS resources. The check-in, check-out script serves as a role-play example of the check-in, check-out process. This script can give examples of a morning check-in with a classroom teacher, an afternoon check-out, and parent communication. The script can be used as a training tool when working with staff members who will be part of the check-in, check-out intervention. It can also be shared with families and students as an example of what to expect. You can follow the link below for a PDF version of this particular check-in, check-out script. The check-in, check-out script is useful because oftentimes our families or our students and even new staff that are not familiar with the check-in, check-out system do not know how to interact with these students. So by having a check-in, check-out script, a role play, it can help all parties involved know what to expect, what questions to ask, and how to respond. Another useful resource for the PBIS interventions is a behavior flowchart. The behavior flowchart serves as a visual example of the steps that are taken from a misbehavior. The flowchart is beneficial and allows administrators, staff, students, and families to understand the process. Many different types of flowcharts can be created to meet the needs of the school. This particular flowchart's behavior can be found on the link below to COI education. If you look at this behavior flowchart, you can see that you'll first observe the behavior. You will then determine what type of behavior it was to decide if you should be staff managed or office managed. Once you've determined, staff managed behaviors can go to intervention 1, move to intervention 2, intervention 3, and as a last result, intervention 4. If it's office managed, you can see step 1, step 2, and step 3. The behavior flowchart is useful because it serves as a visual way for everyone to have the same expectations. It does not leave room for error, and everyone can be consistent with the expectations. The school-wide positive behavior intervention and support book also serves as a beneficial resource for PBIS. Additionally, there is a class-wide positive behavior intervention support. Both of these books discuss the outcomes, practices, systems, data, and problem-solving techniques. It will walk you through each of the tiers 1 through 3, and they can be purchased at Amazon or eBay. The Tier 2 positive behavior support at the secondary targeted group level book discusses strategies, action plans, resource examples, and more to help guide the Tier 2 intervention. This book is more specifically geared to interventions that you can utilize in the Tier 2 system. Additionally, many of the same interventions can be adapted to the Tier 3 intervention on an individualized focus. Our next slide shows several different resource websites that you can go to. These websites offer intervention strategies for tiers 1 through 3. Many of these offer resources with examples of forms that you can use. They offer examples of what an intervention looks like and when we should be utilizing tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. These resource websites include the Center on PBIS, the Northwest PBIS Network, the Florida PBIS Project, the Oklahoma Tiered Intervention System of Support, and this is through the State Department of Education specific to Oklahoma. PBIS Apps is a website that offers many different apps that you can use for data collection. The PBIS Management System for School-Wide Success. This is offering a lot of different rewards that you can use for the PBIS program. The PBIS Resource Guide, PBIS World, and PBIS, a new kind of culture, not a curriculum. In conclusion, if a child cannot learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn.